We had the United States Supreme Court oral argument yesterday in Cargill versus the ATF and Merrick Garland involving the Bumpstock ban. One thing that came across to me from this argument is that if you have a bump stock or had a bump stock in the past or have a bump stock down there in Texas and Louisiana in the First Circuit, guess what? They want to put you in prison. You're not going to want to miss this video when we break it down from what was said during the argument just yesterday. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and author of Disarmed, What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms, among other books. All right, folks, so major oral argument in Cargill versus Merrick Garland involving the Biden administration's bump stock ban they're enforcing that arose during the Trump administration days. There's going to be a lot of videos we're going to cover on this. There's going to be a lot of lessons here about our Second Amendment rights and our gun-related rights across the country. But today I want to focus on one thing and a warning to you. Something that not only did I flag when I listened to the oral argument, but several Supreme Court justices flagged, and that is, it appears, in many respects, the Department of Justice under Joe Biden is very interested in putting you in prison if you have a bump stock, because you are possessing an illegal machine gun. And I'm going to play the clips for you, and you put the transcript down below, and you can check it out for yourself. The good news is that several justices were concerned about this issue. Justice Alito, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Gorsuch all made specific comments. Even Justice Sotomayor flagged the issue. So I want to play some of the clips here and talk about what they mean, and then I want to specifically call out an argument made by the Department of Justice about a doctrine known as the Entrapment by Estoppel argument, and why it really is false to think that is going to protect gun owners in any respect. We're going to get to that at the very end of this video, but for now, let's talk about the issue. Specifically, it came up during the oral argument before the Supreme Court. What about people that have possessed bump stocks, given the fact that there's this big kerfluffle and a huge debate about whether or not a bump stock is a machine gun, where the courts all across the country have split, administrations have split on the issue. The Obama administration says that a bump stock was not a machine gun. The George W. Bush administration said that bump stocks were not a machine gun. And the initial part of the Trump administration said bump stocks were not a machine gun. Dianne Feinstein, believe it or not, who hates guns, says the bump stocks are not a machine gun. And then, of course, you have this about face in the middle of the Trump years because of the ATF's reinterpretation of what a bump stock is under the machine gun definition of the National Firearms Act. And here is where this gets interesting. The justices immediately started raising questions about, isn't this going to be unfair to American gun owners because they may be put in jail? Let's start with Justice Alito. Samuel Alito makes this initial comment and flags this issue right off the top. Here, roll the tape.
What is the situation of people who have possessed bump stocks between the time of the ATF's new rule and the present day, or between the time of the new rule and the Fifth Circuit decision? Can they be prosecuted?
I think probably yes, unless they had gotten some judicial relief from the rule. The rule has not been enjoined. It hasn't been vacated writ large. So I think the government has made clear that this is what we think the statute means.
So there you have it. Right off the bat, the attorney for the Department of Justice, Solicitor General's office, basically says, yeah, I think the answer is probably yes. You could possibly be indicted and go to prison. And that is really disconcerting, because Justice Alito goes on to say exactly that. WTF, basically, in very civil, professional Supreme Court talk. But here's what Alito says in response to that. Listen in.
Isn't that disturbing? People in the Fifth Circuit who've been possessing firearms since the beginning of 2023, let's say they are aware of the Fifth Circuit's decision that they can be criminally prosecuted for doing something that the Court of Appeals that governs their territory has said is not illegal.
But the good news is it's not just Justice Alito flagging this issue. Justice Neil Gorsuch out of Colorado, that's where he's from, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. He's originally from Colorado. Justice Gorsuch immediately jumped in and basically says, wait a minute, so you're saying that people are literally at risk of going to prison for 10 years because of these games of the ATF. That's kind of shocking. Listen to what Justice Gorsuch has to say, and you can see he's like furrowing his brow, being like, hey, what are you guys talking about here? Listen to Justice Gorsuch with this clip right here, right now.
Fletcher, on that score, can we just step back a minute? I can certainly understand why these items should be made illegal. But we're dealing with a statute that was enacted in the 1930s. And through many administrations, the government took the position that these bump stocks are not machine guns. And then you adopted an interpretive rule, not even a legislative rule, saying otherwise, that would render between 250,000 and 500,000 people federal felons, and not even through an APA process they could challenge, subject to 10 years in federal prison. And the only way they can challenge it is if they're prosecuted. And they may well wind up dispossessed of guns, all guns in the future, as well as a lot of other civil rights, including the right to vote.
But beyond Justice Gorsuch and Justice Alito, there's also another justice that is very concerned, and this is great news because I would say that Justice Brett Kavanaugh is a so-called swing vote on this case, although I think he's very sympathetic that the ATF has done overreach here. He did not tip his hand hugely in this case and during an oral argument, but he clearly is concerned about the ATF playing games with the definition of machine gun as applied to bump stocks. Listen to Justice Kavanaugh's back and forth with the Department of Justice lawyer right here.
Even if you are not aware of the legal prohibition, you can be convicted.
That's right. But that's true of all machine guns. I mean, all different sorts of devices. I think the distinct problem here is the one that's created by the fact that the agency was previously saying that these were not machine guns. We acknowledge that those people who, in reliance on that...
That's going to ensnare a lot of people who are not aware of the legal prohibition.
So there you have it. Justice Kavanaugh says it's going to snare a lot of people, but there was some humor in this. But remember, humor, as you know, is the most dangerous and damning technique when you're dealing with totalitarian regimes. The last thing totalitarians or wannabe tyrants want to hear is anything where you're making fun of them, you're using humor, and so on. Now, the reason why I bring this up is that Justice Gorsuch came back in and really hammered home the notion that American gun owners are going to know that these bump stocks are machine guns, and the absurdity of thinking that they're somehow on notice that this is the case. Listen to literally the humor uses, the way that Justice Gorsuch uses humor here to make fun of the ATF's position. Check it out.
Because people will sit down and read the Federal Register.
No, I think because people who have these devices...
That's what they do in their evening for fun. Gun owners across the country crack it open next to the fire and the dog.
Now, in addition to the conservative justices, even a liberal justice, Justice Sotomayor, flagged this issue as well. Now, we're going to lose, at the end of the day, the votes of Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, and Justice Brown Jackson. But the fact is, even Justice Sotomayor was concerned about the fairness to gun owners, believe it or not, and she specifically pushes the ATF and the Department of Justice as to whether or not they're going to prosecute. Listen to this clip, and then I'm going to point out to you why the Department of Justice argument here actually is BS when we get to it. But let's roll the tape of Justice Sotomayor and the DOJ lawyer right here.
Are you representing on behalf of the government that you're not going to prosecute anyone prior to 2017? Anyone who wasn't a felon or disqualified for some other reason?
I am. ATF made very clear in enacting this rule that anyone who turned in their bump stock or destroyed it before March of 2018 would not face prosecution. As a practical matter, also, the statute of limitations for this offense is 5 years. So in a month, the statute of limitations would be gone. We have not prosecuted those people. We won't do it. And if we tried to do it, I think they would have a good defense based on entrapment by estoppel.
Now, if you heard what the DOJ lawyer says, he made a reference about entrapment by estoppel. You hear him? He says, oh, and also gun owners that have bump stocks will have an argument, arguably, for entrapment by estoppel. Now, this is simply not true in a real sense. It may be a theoretically true, but not true. What entrapment by estoppel is, effectively, is that an American relies on a statement by a government official or something like that, that he's complying with the law, he's doing everything right, and it turns out that's not right. And then as an affirmative defense at trial, that's where you get to spend lots and lots of money and spend lots of time with lawyers and get indicted and get into the system and get your photo taken by the police department, all that exciting stuff. And then you get to assert at trial after you lose tons of money that you've been entrapped by the doctrine of estoppel. But what the Department of Justice in their argument before the Supreme Court conveniently failed to disclose is the case out of the United States Court of Appeals called the United States versus Hardridge. Now, in the Hardridge case, this is very important because back then there was a discussion. It was a case involving a man who had a state court conviction that was a felony under federal law, and eventually he was possessed firearms, and he was indicted under federal law and put in prison, or essentially was convicted. I don't know if he went to prison, but he was convicted of a bunch of charges of possessing a firearm while being a felon. And the reason why this is significant is Mr. Herdridge in that case asserted exactly this argument of entrapment by Estoppel. He said, look, when I was convicted of the first felonies under state law back in the day, my defense attorney told me that I was a juvenile and thus my record would be expunged. It would not be a basis for me to lose my gun rights down the road. Moreover, when the state court judge, so he said, the state court judge who sentenced me made a comment that says that I wouldn't be allowed to have firearms when I left prison, but I thought what that meant was that for the 2 years of probation after prison, I could not possess guns during that 2-year window, and after that, I would be fine. So he basically asserted this entrapment by Estoppel, and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, a federal court of appeals, says none of that as a matter of law would work, even if that's true, as an entrapment by Estoppel, because you can't rely on these statements by officials. So it seems to me that if you were indicted because you possessed a bump stock and they indicted you for possessing an unregistered machine gun that you didn't have a license for, guess what? You would be able to say, well, I entrusted myself to the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals decision in the Cargill case down below, or to statements made by the ATF or by the Bush administration or by the Obama administration or whatever, and it looks like based on the federal case law, you would probably be SOL. You would not have a viable defense. And of course, it's not really that much of a defense because, you get to tell a story to the jury. Maybe they believe you, maybe they don't, but the point is none of this is going to work out all that well for gun owners. So to say in oral argument for the Supreme Court that this is a possible defense really is mouthing words, but in the real world, again, I don't think it's a real right because the remedy is so speculative. I don't think you can count on it, and I think that the justices are going to catch on. So anyway, there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's video. We're going to do a lot more of this, breaking it down in geeky details, but as you can see, that the Department of Justice under Joe Biden absolutely would be glad, in my opinion, to put you in prison if you're an American gun owner. This is not a shock. I talked about this in another book I wrote called First They Came for the Gun Owners, that discusses these sorts of activities by the anti-gun movement. Certainly the Biden administration is part of the anti-gun movement in America. There's no debate about that. And I think hopefully you've learned we got to mind our P's and Q's out there and be very careful. But the good news is I think we are going to win the Cargill case, which means bump stocks will not be viewed as a machine gun, which will be a huge win for the Second Amendment movement, even though it's not a Second Amendment case. But it's going to be a close call. I think we're going to be okay, but it's going to be a close call. So we'll see what happens when this decision comes out in June. So there you have it. All right, folks, hope you follow me on X at 4Boxes Diner. A lot more Second Amendment information there. And make sure you subscribe and resubscribe here. People keep getting knocked off. I'm trying to get to at least 150,000 subscribers here on YouTube. It's hard to do that with all the other things going on. And I don't know, we're just not getting the numbers like I'd like to, but we're working hard at it. And again, we appreciate you joining us, and we will see you again soon here at, yes, you got it, the 4Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.